What if the story you've been living your whole life wasn't actually the truth?
What if it was just a set of old beliefs created years ago that are still running the show today?
I'm Victoria.
And I'm Milt.
And this is Rewrite Your Story, the podcast where we explore how the narratives in your head shape your life
and how you can begin rewriting them with clarity, compassion, and tools you can actually use.
Let's dive in.
All right, everyone. We are back this week, and Victoria is having some major technical issues. So you get just me. We do the best we can with just one of us. So I guess I should do show and tell. So, I probably should do the welcome back. That's the technical intro to the show. I got a cool in-office Christmas gift this year. One of my therapists, he drew my name and he made a whole series of fidget toys. This one's really nice because it's got this feature where like it rotates this way, and then you've got the spin in the middle. You've got some options. You can also rub, like it turns slowly. I think it turns better than this. Like I get this option. I like fidget toys that again aren't just one thing. Like you can use them in multiple ways, because the moment I start playing with it, that's when I start feeling the problem. I think I've said that before. So good fidget toy. It was a lot of fun. I'm hoping where our roots ones come soon, and that'll be that. But I'm going to go back to my new favorite ones because they work really well for me. So we took a break from everything, and what we're doing now is we're going to jump into one of the core skills that we kind of skipped before we jump back into the pillars. And the core skill that we're going to talk about it's called the skill box structure, or the skill box. And this is one of the measuring tools that we use. So in the 15 years that I've been doing this stuff, whether it be as a student in my grad program, working in residential treatments, or as a therapist, I've been doing skills training the entire time. Behaviorist background, or the school of behavior, is where I come from. I've gotten more into the more psychoanalytical stuff. I'm a much bigger fan of Jung than I used to be, and I really look at his work now a lot, especially where we're going in society. I actually think Jung's work is going to be really important. However, everything with like Jung and the psychoanalytical work, like Freud and talk therapy, and we're trying to figure out how your childhood is shaping where you are. All of those things are super important. I love all of those schools of thought, and I've learned a lot from them. And I think shadow work is probably one of the most important things that we can possibly do for our souls. And so I've really been brought over to that side. Behavior gives us measuring sticks. And I like measuring sticks. I like to know where I'm at, where I've been, where I'm going. I think a lot of things work really well if we can actually measure what's going on with us. The benefit of measuring sticks is it gives you feedback. The drawback of measuring sticks is we tend to use them in the not most effective ways, because we judge where we should be versus where we are. We want to measure where we are, not so we can judge ourselves, so we can make accurate adjustments. We use the metaphor of change and acceptance, and we talked about that before. Change and acceptance creates that space where we have to understand where we are to get to where we're going. So if we don't measure, if we don't actually assess, we can never figure out what we need to accept. And then we can't figure out what's effective change. Because if we just make changes, then we're kind of stuck. Or in fact, I really like a metaphor that we're going to go over. You can't just frost the cake. You have to have the cake on the inside. If it's just frosting, then it's not cake. And then you might as well just get the frosting if you can. Because why would you want to spread it if it's not going on the cake? You just eat it. So we're going to go back to this cake metaphor over and over and over again, because this is a recipe. In a recipe, it has to be measured, especially baking recipes. Cooking recipes, I love watching cooking shows because cooking shows it's like jazz. They just, throw things in and see how it works. And, it's kind of musical. And then all the flavors melt together and they turn into something. But you're not necessarily guaranteed to get the same song every time with cooking. And in fact, you don't always want the same thing every time, unless you're going to a restaurant, and then there's precision there. But like at home, sometimes you want to play around with the recipe. You just want to throw in a little extra, see the reaction. Like that's kind of jazz. Recipes are more like classical pieces. They're set up to be played a specific way. And that specific pattern creates the whole experience for everyone. And so we are going to try to create a method so that you can actually measure your whole experience. That's why this metaphor works as more of a piece that you're playing as opposed to like a jazz piece where there's improvisation. So we've talked about the compass before. We've talked about learning how to follow, where you're going and learning how to connect with your body and those kind of things. But it doesn't necessarily, like the compass isn't going to bake the cake. Or, for example, like a Lego set, if you have just a bunch of pieces without instructions, it's not going to get built the way that you want it to turn out. So the instruction manual is useful and it opens up the possibility to be creative down the road. So that measuring idea is useful because we want to be able to see where we are. We want to see where we were and how we're moving. However, measurement is only a piece of the information. It's not all of the information. So let's go into why measuring sticks can be problematic. The problem with measuring sticks is if we have a very big judgmental part, it makes it really hard to not listen to that part of where we should be. That idea of where we should be is one of the most weighing things as you get older in life. And I'm sure some high schoolers feel the same and they can tell you about that too. We don't want to use the measuring stick as the thing we use to beat ourselves up. That's really important because we don't need more judgment of ourselves. That's why I think this metaphor is going to work really well because it's a metaphor around a blueprint and a way to see how we're going, how we're doing. Blueprints, I think, are useful because they're not designed to say every step. There's still some ability to kind of interpret it and invent. So let's go through the blueprint of the skill box. So the skill box goal is to enforce a little bit of structure or rigidity, right? The same way you use a recipe, especially in something like baking, it's more of a science. And if you're a cook out there and you believe cooking is a science, it absolutely is a science. Baking has a lot more precision in it. And so whenever we're doing things that are foundational, we do them a lot more with precision so that the structure or the foundation is a little more solid. I use the metaphor of when you're learning an instrument, you start with scales. Everyone starts with scales. So I was a percussionist. Even we started with scales. We played all the notes on the bells. Even though the drum didn't have different notes per se, but the timpani does, and the bells and the chimes. There's all sorts of things that even in percussion you still have to know the notes, and you have to know how one note sounds off of each other. So learning the scales gives you a foundation. Then what happens is you can start playing with the scales. So when someone composes a piece of music, all they did was take the foundational material and put it in a different order because they knew how to use it from a foundational standpoint. That's what this is. This is the structure or the foundational thing we're going to use to kind of measure where we are in life. And it tends to be a little bit more rigid because this structure is necessary to kind of repeat over and over. So let's go into what it is. Skills in general tend to have a single objective. So another metaphor I like to use is I like to golf. I'm not good at it, but I like it. Individual sports are something that I'm much more a fan of because I was not athletic. It's not very fast. I just didn't have a lot of good skills. So in a team game, I tended to be the Achilles heel on the team. So golf or things like that, where it's only me, I'm just playing against myself. Now, in golf, every club can push the golf ball further down the field. Specific clubs do it in specific ways for different reasons. The driver is designed for distance. The sand wedge or the lob wedges are designed for high arcing positions. The various irons have different degrees because they're trying to be precise in how close you're getting to the pin. The closer you get to the pin, the more you need to change the way you swing and the club that you use. And then, of course, on the green, you use the putter. And the putter is what you use to put the ball in the hole. In reality, I could golf an entire round of golf with just my driver. It just would go very, very poorly. It would be, or I can absolutely putt with my driver badly. I can get out of the sand probably with my driver badly, assuming that my driver doesn't break in the process of trying to get out of sand. There would be lots of ways that I could do it, folding it differently. I could try to figure out different ways to swing the driver. That's just not very smart. So it's not that skills shouldn't be one thing. It's that we have to learn how to use the right skill for the right job. And knowing how a golf club works means that I can be creative with it. So the people who end up doing trick shots and things like that, those are the people who've taken the use or the knowledge of the device that you have, like the driver, and they do amazing things with it that I can't do because they figured out how to use it in more ways. But they still wouldn't use it to get out of a sand trap if they didn't have to. And that's kind of what we're talking about is we don't want to use the wrong skill for the wrong job. So skills tend to have a job. We talk about this with parts. Parts have a job, and we want them to stay with that job, or we want them to improve in that job or find more flexible ways to do it. But ultimately, we still want that job accomplished. Some other examples that we've already worked on, like grounding, aims to establish our, calming down our system. But we don't necessarily use grounding when we're in a crisis. You could, there's things that grounding could do, but if you don't have the time to ground, then it's not the best skill to use. So again, taking a moment to take a breath is a grounding skill. Spending 5 minutes to ground if your house is on fire, probably not wise. You can do it. It may not be the best thing.
Hey everyone. Okay, so I know this episode was supposed to be a Milton only episode. And if you've stayed through this whole episode, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. As per usual, there are always just technical difficulties, but I believe that we are working them out. I think on my end, I think everything's fine. I hope so. Anyways, I just wanted to jump on and kind of just round out and finish off where Milton was going with everything. Listening to it, I think there was just really great content in his recording. And I just wanted to kind of give this episode a more graceful ending because he experienced some difficulties, technical difficulties on his end as well. So Milt walked us through what the skill box is and the idea of this skill box. I have my little notes down here. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me while I was listening to what Milt was saying and listening to this episode, the skill box, it's not a test and it's not something that we should be using to judge ourselves with. Like Milt said, I think that can be the issue of measurement, of this idea of measurement, because when we have those parts that are self-critical and judgmental and just really loud, it's so easy to fall into that. But the skill box is a container and it's a way to help us slow things down for us to actually see what's happening within ourselves, within our body, within our emotions, the patterns and the habits that we have when it comes to certain behaviors and things like that. Mel talked about this idea of structure, using it as a form of support rather than restriction. And he also discussed how our skills, like the tools that we use, he mentioned recipes, instruments, and his golf clubs. These are meant to be used for specific jobs and specific situations that we come across in life. He mentioned grounding. If we are in a situation where we have the ability to take the time to ground ourselves and to kind of recenter, then it's beneficial to use that. But if we are in a situation where our house is burning down, taking the time to, say, do a body scan, like focus on my feet, focus on as like the walls are burning around us, like that's not effective, right? And so recognizing that each skill has a specific time to use it, and recognizing, when it is effective versus when it is ineffective. And with that, like there's not remembering, like there's not a version of perfect with this. It's about trying it over and over and over again and recognizing every situation is a unique situation. We're going to get different results when we use it, and when we use these skills in certain environments with certain people, and like all there's so many different factors. And so there's not a perfect way to do this. It's just about doing it and about using them and utilizing them, and again figuring out what is effective for us and what feels aligned with our system and with ourselves versus not, right? Overall, though, this episode, though it is chaotic and a little all over the place, I really think that what Milton talked about sets the foundation for where we're headed. Once you understand how to read the recipe and what tools to use, what skills to use in certain situations, that's when you can start working with the bigger emotional waves that everyone experiences in a more grounded way rather than reacting. Think of like Inside Out. Inside Out 2, I haven't actually seen it, but just like clips of when anxiety and when Riley goes into an anxiety attack, anxiety is the only emotion that's controlling that board. The process of grounding and the purpose of what Mel was talking about earlier is being able to allow other parts of us, other tools that we have, skills that we can utilize, just that overall capital S self to come in and respond to a situation rather than reacting. What comes with that is not having our parts kind of take over and do what they think is best and what they think is safest and most effective, because it just a lot of the time those patterns, those habits, those behaviors are probably leading to damage and leading to harm in some type of way. And so we want to get to a place where we, again, that capital S self is in charge and is leading the system, and we are responding based off of all the different factors of, this is aligned with my values, it's aligned with my long-term goals, it's getting me to what my life worth living looks like and where I want to be within that and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully this little breakdown was beneficial. I am glad that I was able to jump on and say hi to you guys this week. And thank you, as always, for being here with us, for allowing us to have these moments where we're still learning. This is still a process. And unfortunately, technology is somewhat out of our control. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Overall, I hope what you take from this is to just remember to be gentle with yourself, to stay curious throughout this whole process. And it is a learning process, and it is something that's going to take time. Try to move away from those judgments. Try to give yourself that grace. And yeah, that's all I got. So we'll see you next episode. Again, thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Rewrite Your Story. Take a moment to notice what story showed up for you today.
Remember, you're not your story. You're the one holding the pen.
And each moment is a chance to write a new chapter.
Be sure to join us next time as we keep exploring the path towards self-alignment.
We'll see you then.